Now, if you don't get the book, it's actually available in our O'Reilly subscription. So this link here, aka the MS Rockstar Programmer Secrets, will take you to the full text of the book.
See this book in the Safari online book.
It is. Okay. All right. Okay, here we go. So let's start out with what's my idea of a rockstar programmer. First of all, I want to say thank you for coming. I know everyone's got tons of things to do. There's probably some people here in the room that are DRI. Anyone here that's currently on DRI for something? Any live site issues that you're putting aside to come to this? Well, anyhow, thank you for doing it. What's my idea of a rockstar programmer? Going through prior art. There's, lots of other people have had this idea to interview people before and bring them to ask them questions and explain the answers. Then categories of secrets. Now, in the book, I have broken it down by the individuals. I have categories of technology experts. So I talked to Rod Johnson, the guy who invented Spring. I talked to James Gosling, the guy who was credited with starting inventing Java. I talked to one of my college buddies, his name's Chris Wilson. He was he worked at NCSA Mosaic, and he came to Microsoft in the early days of the Internet, and was one of the co-architects of Internet Explorer, like 4 and prior. So these are people who are technology experts. Then I have another category for software pedagogy experts, people who teach about software, and then I have another category for people who are consulting and sort of software process experts. So that's one category. In this talk, I'm breaking it down into two different things, ancient secrets and modern secrets. But before I begin with that, let's talk about what is a rockstar programmer here. In my opinion, it's totally subjective, right? This is one of my favorite movies, Buckaroo Banzai and His Adventures Across the Eighth Dimension. And the main character of this movie is, he's a brain surgeon, he's a rock star, he's a test pilot, he's got lots of different things that he does. So for me, a rockstar programmer is someone who has a good mix of all the skills, someone who is, not a jerk, someone you really work hard to hire onto your team, and someone whose team you really work hard to join. So in large organizations like Microsoft, people switch roles pretty frequently, right? But it's common to find certain teams that have people that gravitate. They're like large planets that suck in other satellites to be around them. I really want to work with this person because he's a really good teacher, or he really knows how to get things done. You'll identify these people, and they kind of attract talent to them, and that's another thing that a rockstar programmer is. This is a guy who's the CIO of, I think, Salesforce, Vala Afshar. If you follow his Twitter, he puts out these lists. His whole Twitter is nothing but these lists. And some of them are pretty useful. This one I thought fits the art of what is a rockstar programmer as well. So into the prior art, there have been a couple books that are interesting about this. Susan Lammers, Programmers at Work, she did this idea back in the 80s. So you might recognize, of course, this guy. He interviewed Bill when he was actually a programmer. So, and the fun thing about this, there's Charles Simonyi and Dan Breslin, I think, who did VisiCalc, is in there. And they actually have the guy who did Pac-Man. They interviewed him. And there's actually source code from Pac-Man in this book. So it's out of print, but if you can get it online, it's very fun to read. Another good book that talks about programmers and computer scientists is Out of Their Minds. So, no one is the first to do anything. I certainly wasn't the first to do this book idea. So what do I mean by secret? Really, it's a character attribute more than anything else. It's not, a secret is not something I'm trying to keep to myself. I want to share it. So there's a lot of books out there about this. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. Those are two different books that talk about the same kind of sense of secrets, things that are useful for people to do. So, as I mentioned, in the book there's different categories. Here I'm breaking it down into old and new. But the problem with categories here is, in its own sense. So let me ask James Gosling what he has to say about categories and why it's a problem. Okay.
It's a goofy Nietzsche quote that shows up in Wayne's World. something like, if you label me, you nullify me or something. Not into labeling things.
Okay.
It really because the labels become the thing that define the universe.
Yeah.
And for me, the really interesting stuff is the stuff that doesn't fit. The big piece of the sort of programming culture these days, where the entire universe is the stuff that generates HTML pages. And the stuff that goes on those HTML pages, and the JavaScript on that, and stuff. And it's like, I think you realize you're like in like this tiny little corner of things. There's so much more cool software out there.
So James feels categories are a problem because when you put a label on something, then you have to exclude all the other things. That's true. But another guy I talked to is this guy, Adrian Collier. He has a really great blog called The Morning Paper. If anyone doesn't follow it, he picks out a paper from the CS literature and analyzes it and highlights it. And he does it almost every day, and it's very good to follow. Anyhow, he was the CIO of Interface 21 and then Spring Source, and he's the guy that Rod Johnson thinks is the top rock star programmer. So he's a really sharp guy. He has a different take on categories. Where's the mouse? There it is.
I guess one of the things about our industry, one thing that attracted me to it is it's always changing. There's just an enormous amount of new stuff flying past you all the time. You have to have some way to sort of systematize, tag, understand, file, make sense of all that immense stream of data flying past you. Okay. And if you've got a way of, even at the first proof level, pigeonholing what something is and putting it in a bucket, that's your very first proof cut at understanding what on earth is going on. So that's one pretty important reason why you want to be able to categorize that.
So, there you go. You have two different perspectives on categories. Me, personally, I am a fan of labels and categories, and that's kind of how cognitively we all work anyway. So for Ancient Secrets, what I've done is extracted some of the things from the book, and I'm presenting them in this talk. So having a balance between humility and pride, being aware of your own ignorance, the importance of collaborating, working in a team, being a member of an invisible college, and having luck. So let's get into those. In the ancient analog here, the notion of pride going before the fall is something that's, of course, very common in Western history and Eastern history as well, of course. But I like this quote: every person should have two pockets, and one there should be a note that says, "For my sake was the world created," and the second there should be a note that says, "I am but dust and ashes." So having a balance between those two things is an important skill. So I talked to Rod about this, about ego, and when you create Spring and it becomes enormously popular and you sell your company to VMware and then it gets sold to VMware again, maybe it may go to your head, right? So let's see what Rod has to say about that.
Very seldom seen a highly successful software developer who didn't have a fair degree of ego. Okay. And I think it does seek to motivate. It serves to motivate. The question is whether or not there's the insight, the metacognition that is getting in the way. And I think it's absolutely vital that people can cope with being wrong and admitting being wrong. But on the other hand, I have seen, the majority of good developers I've seen, or outstanding developers, did have, probably bigger than average egos. Achieving outstanding things very often does involve feeling that you know better and acting on it.
Well, there you go. So the other one is, another ancient secret is awareness of your own ignorance. So in the ancient Greece, the story of Socrates, the oracle at Delphi says Socrates is the wisest man, and Socrates says, surely this cannot be the case. So he goes around and talks to all the other wise men that he can find. Unfortunately, back then it was just men. I'm sure there were wise women back then too, but he didn't talk to any of them. That was his fault. He lost out there. But Socrates concludes that he's right because none of the other people he interviewed is aware of their own ignorance. So being aware of what you don't know is an important thing. And this comes to this thing I have in the appendix of the book called The 5 Orders of Ignorance from this guy, Philip Armour. And I like this because it categorizes knowledge. And again, categories are fun for me. So 0th order ignorance is lack of ignorance. I come from Sun and Oracle. I know Java. I know Java is fine for this kind of problem. I know how to use it. 1st order ignorance is lack of knowledge. There might be the case that there's other problems out there that Python is a better fit for. So I don't know Python, but I know that I can go find it. I know that I don't know it. So I can go reduce my 1st order ignorance to 0, and then I can solve problems with that. 2nd order ignorance is lack of awareness. Well, I know the problem I have isn't right for Java, and it isn't right for Python. I don't know what the right language is. But I have some people on my team that I can talk to and explain the problem, and they say, here's another thing you don't know. You might really want to try Go instead. So I go and learn Go, and then I'm down to here, and then I go to 0, and I can solve the problem. The important thing is I have a process to find out that I didn't know something. 3rd order ignorance is lack of that process. If you're out there groping around and you have a problem, you don't know how to solve it, you don't know what the tool is, you don't know who to talk to, this is where the really fun and interesting problems are, open-ended problems. So the effort, and this is, who has been doing programming since before Stack Overflow existed? Anyone here? Okay. So it turns out that when the world existed before Stack Overflow, and you had a lot more difficult time with this. Stack Overflow and basically the internet itself really has worked quite well on this 3rd order ignorance, which is one of the reasons why the internet is such an amazing invention, I think, really. So 4th order ignorance is ignorance of the orders of ignorance. So now none of you have that. All right. So let's see what James has to say about that.
Being aware of your own ignorance is crucial to everyone. And that's not particular to software at all. I don't care whether you're whatever or you're flipping burgers in McDonald's. Okay. You gotta be aware of your own ignorance. Okay. That must be a shame factor. I mean, right? It's not like everybody knows everything. Right.
Well, being metacognitive, aware of ignorance is one type of this kind of metacognition. How much of the time in your day-to-day job do you spend thinking about how you're doing, thinking about your thinking process?
Almost none.
Almost none. So you're mostly in the mode, in the flow state, kind of.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, that's James Gosling. He can be in the flow state. So those of us who are not inventing languages that become very popular have to spend a little more time in metacognitive mode. So this is Jennifer Peepa. She is an educator that I met in my conference travels, and she was teaching a class of students about sort of script writing and media development. And I wanted to ask her about how you have courage in the face of others' expertise. And this is particularly important for me because I, have a very specific, deep knowledge of like Java language and stuff like that. But I didn't know anything about how to do ARM templates or solution templates or UI definition.json, all of these things that are the lingua franca of working successfully in Microsoft. I had to learn all that. So, and I'm still learning. So I'm really much at the beginning of this, and having courage in the face of others' expertise is a very important rockstar programmer skill. So let's see what Jennifer says there.
The interesting thing for me was being in this really small, focused group of grad students was that there were people that had incredible skills, far ahead of me in how they did what they did, but nobody in the class was good at everything. Mm-hmm. It's really easy to feel unconfident when you see somebody do something that you don't know how to do, mm-hmm. But then there were things, just realizing, there are things that I know how to do that they don't know how to do. The things that they know how to do that I don't know how to do, I can learn. Mm-hmm. And the things that I know how to do that they don't know how to do, I can teach. Working with people who are better than me at stuff raises my level, but I shouldn't undersell myself, because when we got to screenwriting and stuff, there were people that really struggled with that, and I was I got this. Interesting.
All right. So another rock star skill, again, along the lines of metacognition, is just knowing when to step away from the keyboard. Now, there is a mental thing that we have in English called OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Has anyone heard of that term? It's just when you are, you have a psychology such that you're really focused on things and you have a hard time switching. And I do find that talking to lots of programmers, they all tend to have a little bit of that going on, because I think it's necessary to have the focus to spend many hours working on this small little thing. And when you get done, you're like, oh my God, it's the best thing ever. And what you've actually done is incredibly small when you try to explain to someone outside. But it took a lot of work to get that victory. But sometimes it's important to know when to step away from the keyboard to get that little break. So Rod has a good story about that from his early days.
Theory seldom saying
No, that's not the right one.
software developer who didn't have theory very big.
No, I'm sorry about that. That was a mistake when I put this together. There's another story that Rod talks about when he was a grad student. I had to convert this from an older kind of presentation template to PowerPoint, and when I did so, I misplaced that video, so I'm apologizing. Let me tell you the story then. Rod just basically tells the story. He was working on a grad student project, and it was the end of the semester, and they had to turn the thing in and get all of their grades, and it just kept crashing. They couldn't figure out what it was. And no one on his team figured it out. And he was saying, well, at the last hour, we just put it aside, went out to the bar, had a few drinks, and came back and found it right away. And he doesn't recommend alcohol as the best way to do it, but, the point was you have to take a break sometimes to let your mind reset. Okay. Another ancient secret here is a willingness to question conventional wisdom. And this guy here is Mikhail Katari. He was a Microsoft employee that was the lead architect of ASP.NET Silverlight. And back at the time when I wrote this book, he was doing that at Microsoft. I was doing JSF at Sun, and we compared notes and had a very similar story about how we were going to handle Ajax. Does anyone remember what Ajax is? It's a web technology, so it used to be quite popular in browsers, but no one talks about Ajax anymore. But back then it was a big deal. So what do you do with questioning conventional wisdom, Nikhil?
I kind of put that as a bucket of being critical, asking the open question when your gut feeling tells you that this isn't like the right thing. Mm-hmm. Have to have that instead of putting solutions. I think that's what separates the programs who write code as opposed to those who programs to actually create a solution.
Okay. So, this is important, the growth mindset, basically. This is talking about the growth mindset.
I got it.
Another aspect is collaboration. So the ancient analog for collaboration is the story of Odysseus. He is in charge of this crew of people, and they have to run the Odyssey to try to get back home, and they have to collaborate and get through all of these challenges to survive and get back home. Unfortunately, the way Odysseus does it, the rest of his crew dies, and he's the only one that survives. So I don't recommend following his example as a manager, but he did get good results out of his team. This guy here is Brian Cantrell. He was the CIO of Joyent, which was the main company behind NPM.js and Node.js, right? So he recently left and put an interesting blog post about why he left. So if you want to find him, he's on Twitter. I think it's bcantrell. But he told me a story about community and collaboration. And when he was growing Joyent, he was also trying to grow the Node ecosystem. So the popularity of Node is due in part to efforts to grow the community that he has to talk about here. So let's see about what he has to say.
Yeah, and I think true technical cost in many regards matters the least. I think that disposition, work ethic, ability to work in a team, humility, the ability to understand complicated systems is in some regards more important than the overconfidence to change something. So many people get surprised by our interview process because I'm not really actually interested in asking you how to balance a red-black tree. In order to succeed, you need to have the ability to, more than anything, you've got to have the ability to grind. You've got to have the ability to be persistent when you are just getting punched in the face metaphorically. I really am interviewing more for intrinsic motivation for the problems that we have. So you have to have enough technical chops to have an appreciation for what you don't know, I think is the most important thing. Yeah.
So here's our own Brendan Burns, and I wanted to ask him about, no relation to me, by the way. Why did Kubernetes become so popular so fast? Because they focused on making the community inclusive. So here's what he had to say about community inclusiveness and Kubernetes.
I think it makes sense to a degree to the container ecosystem in general, and I think it's because we've seen the cloud take off in significant ways, and yet I don't think that the tools for managing and deploying applications kept pace with the flexibility and power that cloud was offering. And so people were sort of overextended with some of the more traditional DevOps tools. And so containers and then Kubernetes really exploded in popularity because they address some pain points that people have. And I think one of the other reasons is that they hit pain points that everyone has. From IT administrators to developers to CTOs, they just hit all of these different pain points. And so it was one of those rare moments where I think everyone was aligned and got a win out of this, right? And so I think when that happens, you see rapid adoption. I will say with Kubernetes in particular, we put a tremendous amount of effort into building a really open, welcoming community, and a community that really tried to embrace everyone. And there was a ton of effort put into that early on. And a really big tent ecosystem. I think that has also been one of the reasons it's been successful, is because we really approached it with a humble approach and an open approach to how you build one of these communities.
Okay. So another aspect of collaboration is mishires. Now here's the funny thing. I have a new perspective being a newer employee here. And when I went to my DevDiv boot camp, which was really great, I heard it say that the way they conducted interviews at Microsoft a long time ago was very different from how they do it now. And one of the people who was actually leading the DevDiv boot camp, I'm not sure if it was John Cunningham or not, but he said like the interviewer was more intent on proving superiority of himself than he was actually than trying to find the skills of the person that was there. So we don't do that anymore in the interview process, and I think that's great. But one thing that thing did do was limit the amount of mishires. Sometimes mishiring happens, and this is what, when you're having a growth, when you're doing lots of hiring, that can sometimes happen. So let's see what Brian Cantrell has to say about when you hire someone that actually turns out to not be a good fit. It's not easy to talk about, but it's something that happens.
Yeah, and mishires are really expensive, and they're really tough. And especially when you're in a high growth mode, you're hiring a lot of people, you're going to have mishires. And everyone loves to say we're going to hire fast and fire fast. And I have never found that to be true. I have found that, you might have some cases, but I've never had one of these, where you hire someone who is so unequivocally poisonous that there is just zero doubt in anyone's mind that this person should not work there anymore. What's much more common is something more nuanced, where you have someone come in and who has strengths, but also has weaknesses that maybe you didn't anticipate, and those weaknesses begin to affect the people around them. Sometimes it's someone that comes in that, seems like a really earnest technologist, but all of a sudden starts thinking politically. And those kinds of issues get really complicated and nuanced very quickly. Especially if you've got someone that's a, well-meaning or hardworking individual, they've got, these traits that are positive, but you also see these very significant traits that are really tough. And I always try to be very honest and direct in my assessment of people and be willing to have tough conversations. I think anyone who is kind of peddling a simple remediation for that, I think is somewhat self-delusional. You don't want to have a culture of ending people's employment against their will, and yet sometimes that's what you have to do. So it's really, really tough. And I don't know that I'm trying to be any better at it as I get older. I think it's just very, very difficult.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the next one here is being a member of the Invisible College. This one I found was super important. It's basically, it comes from the Renaissance, where Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler and all of those early scientists and physics people were sharing books, because books were such a rare commodity then, and they exchanged knowledge by basically the annotations and margin notes in those books. They formed kind of a group of knowledge sharing. So it's really a more common term, or more rigorous definition is right here. There's an AKAMF link I created that talks to the article about this, but informal communications produced by communities of people who share an interest in a common subject. It's basically the people you stick around that know how to filter information for you, and let's see what I mean by that. These are two of the people in my Invisible College. I went to UIUC with this guy, Max Levchin. He is the co-founder of PayPal, and also this other guy, Libor Mikrik, who is the co-founder of this company, Slide.com, which got acquired by Google pre-IPO. And let's see what they had to say about Invisible College.
There's generally one or two developers that I think are really awesome, that I know personally, and when I have a very specific question about how to do something, I try to rephrase it as the most general question, and then I ask them, and they don't have an answer that's really powerful. More than likely, I am one of those people for someone else, because I get those questions late, and I think it's just another filtering process where, like, the guy who's the CTO of Guild, was my chief architect at PayPal, like, super awesome programmer, knows his stuff really well. I think he reads up on a lot of stuff, but he definitely keeps tabs on stuff more than I do. So I say, how do you do this? He's like, well, here's how Ruby does it. I'm like, okay, well, that's not really about Ruby, it's about how to do a good pattern for web processing. It's a distributed bullshit detector, though, because you've got these people you trust, and everyone is an expert in some area or in more interested areas. There's areas in which you're generally interested and you work on, and then for all. But it doesn't have to be all computing. It's impossible to keep tabs on all computing. There's a shameless quote from Jonathan Lemon right before his death. He said that back when I was young, it was actually possible to know about half of known math, implying, or that he was one of the people who knew about half of known math. But at this point, I don't even know if anyone understands 10%. And even that, I think, is basically something that indicates increase of bandwidth, because people used to write each other letters to exchange math knowledge, and by the time Jonathan Lemon was old, he was actually electronic communication was possible. So just the overload of research and collaboration indicates impossibility of knowing everything. Therefore, one is probably better suited to be an expert in a few fundamental things than just trying to keep tabs on everything.
What we're done saying is that there's really not that much new on a year-to-year basis. So the better your bullshit filter or your distributed bullshit filter is, the less you're really going to have to go out of your way.
I haven't learned anything. So, the relationships you build with bullshit detector, people that you sweat it out some late night hours, hacking, and then you sort of trust them because you've seen how their brain works and it's sufficiently easy for you to model like what they would think is good.
All right, so I mentioned categories as a way of keeping tabs. Another way is just to have friends that keep tabs, and you each kind of just focus on different areas and then share notes. That's a basic idea. Here, another ancient secret that's really important is luck, just having luck. You know, being lucky is not something you can control, right? However, I talked to several people in the book, and Rod Johnson was like, well, competent people tend to be luckier. Luck can be highly influenced, being prepared to take advantage of opportunities that come up. Kosuke did exactly that when he invented Hudson. He was, the story was, he was, on a business trip to Burlington. There's a Sun campus there, Burlington, Massachusetts, and he was faced with this problem of trying to do builds, and he sat down in the hotel room one night and just basically wrote a web front end to let you put entries into cron tab. That's how Hudson started. And he was able to do that and turn it into this successful company called CloudBees, and now Jenkins is very popular in CI. Taking advantage of opportunities that come your way. This guy here is Dave Thomas. He is one of the pioneers of object-oriented programming, and I talked to him about luck. Here's what he had to say about that.
Luck is always essential. I think my need, I think with regard to technology, you have to be a wildly optimistic downside planner.
What does that mean?
It means that you can't bet that the technology is going to take off, is going to work, going to sell, going to commercialize in the short term. It basically says that you have to tack towards your course. You can't go and get a big injection of VC money and say, okay, we're going to hit the market in 3 years.
Okay, so I like that, and that fits in with what we're doing here at Microsoft, because you can absolutely see that we're placing bets all over the place, and some of them are going to pan out and go well, and some of them are not. You know, for example, the acquisition of Nokia, or the mobile phone division. Coming from the outside, look at that. That was enormously courageous to make that call, to just write that off and say, hey, you know, we can't do it. We're going to put that aside. And that, I think that takes a lot of guts. So, but on the other hand, you have to have the capital to place the bets and know that some of them are going to fail. Okay, that's it for ancient secrets. Modern secrets, I'm going to skip through some of these because we had some A/B trouble, so you can get more detail from the book, and this talk is actually online too. Mastery of tools, being an optimizer and a customizer. The process of software, you know, I spent a fair amount of time in the book talking to people about how to write software, fix it, maintain it, how to discern technology trends, also knowing when it's time to change jobs, and knowing, having a non-IT plan B. If you are, you know, in this industry for a while, you might get tired and kind of burnt out, so having a second career path, a second act, is something that's useful. So, what is an important skill here? It's being a customizer, optimizer, master of tools, right? I found that a lot of the people that are successful are the ones that have to smooth out the ripples in their environment. If they're presented with an annoyance, rather than just putting up with it every time, they'll write a plug-in or an extension or some script that can automate that problem away. And having skill at that is definitely a rockstar programmer skill. Chris Wilson, I interviewed him about this, and here's what he had to say.
You need to know your tools really well. At the same time, it doesn't really need to know how to use every single tool perfectly. It's more, I think about it in terms of being a mechanic or working on your house. You need to have a tool that's the right tool for the job. So if you are really heavily into debugging, you need to absolutely understand how to do, user debugging tools extremely deeply and broadly.
So, you know, I found like people that know all the keyboard shortcuts. You watch them using VS Code or something, and they can just sail through it like Matrix. That's a really good programmer skill, and I think it's something to aspire to. Okay. I think I covered that one. Yes. That's what it was. I'll skip that though. This guy is Andy Hunt. He is one of the signers of the Agile Manifesto. If you've ever done Scrum or, you know, Agile programming, he's one of the original pragmatic programmers. So I interviewed him in the book, and he talks about the software safety net. Basically, mastery of version control, comprehensive unit integration system tests, and all software dependency management and artifact creation is automated under version control. I think we've reached this as an industry pretty well now. That wasn't always the case, but with the maturing of DevOps technologies, it's gotten to the point where it's pretty safe to do almost anything to the code base. You know, gone are the days where you might be afraid to make a change because it would be you can't roll it back. Everything is rollback now. Okay, where does the productivity come from? I'm going to skip this one in the interest of time. And basically come to my story here. Before joining Microsoft, I had been doing some Go work at Oracle. And I was reading this book, The Go Programming Language. And I had the perspective of having worked in the industry for long enough that when I come across this exercise, which is exercise 14 in chapter 4, an exercise was create a web server that queries GitHub once and then allows navigation of the list of bug reports, milestones, and users. The fact that something so advanced with so many underlying things can be a simple exercise in a book just goes to show how far advanced the platforms have become. 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have tools to do all of these things in a simple API way. Now, that's understood. So, being able to take advantage of the productivity revolution as it goes forward is an important skill. I asked Brendan Burns, will the increasing automation of the cloud cause computer science to be a less viable career choice? You know, if everything is getting automated, and maybe it's not as important to focus anymore. Maybe it's it's going to run out. Let's see what he had to say about it.
I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think the history of computing is that every time you build an abstraction layer, people simply build more applications and build more interesting applications. And so you could say that, you know, the development of web technologies and JavaScript and things like that enable a whole bunch of people to become developers. I don't think anybody would argue that somehow by becoming easier reduced the number of developers we had in the world. In fact, it actually magnified it. So I would focus on and actually say, I think that the real challenge and the real opportunity that cloud presents for business is the opportunity to build better systems with the people who they have, right? I think that with Kubernetes, you're doing things like automatic health checks that you don't have to teach someone. I guess another way of saying this is you don't have to teach someone that they need to put a wrapper around their application to keep it alive if it happens to crash with Kubernetes. Kubernetes just does that for you, right? There's all of this automation. Maybe another analogy would be that I use often is, you know, when I was a kid, I had a remote control plane, and that remote control plane flew for a grand total of about 10 seconds before I flew it into the ground where it died, right? And children now have a quadcopter drone that they fly from their iPad around the house, right? And the reason that that's possible is because there's automation. There's computers that are assisting people to get their jobs done. I don't think that we've lost anything. In fact, I would argue that we've gained a lot via that automation. Because people can focus on the interesting parts of the job, not on the nuts and bolts of how do I reliably display and do my work.
So, that's why I call this writing a hamster wheel progress, because you have to be able to stay on top of that. If you just stay focused and say, oh, okay, I'm just going to do my one little task, eventually that will be automated away. So the real skill is knowing how to automate yourself. Another important modern programming secret is how to get a new idea adopted. So I asked James Gosling, when he invented the syntax of Java, did he intentionally choose a C-like syntax? And he said, absolutely. I wanted to, you know, if I presented them with Lisp, they would be freaked out with all those parentheses. So I had to be able to give something to them in a way that they understood it, right? So getting bankers to use garbage collection. In order to do that, he had to present Java, which had some dynamic aspects to it, in a way that existing programmers would understand. So when you have a new idea, it's very important sometimes to package that idea in the language of an old thing to get the people to adopt it. We're coming to the end here. One of the skills is having business acumen. So not just being a hardcore programmer, but, you know, knowing how the money is made, how the business operates itself. So let's see what Adrian has to say about that.
It was always a great pleasure to visit. I remember inside IBM and see a company like the place. Probably like, how far can you progress just being a really good programmer, right? And that's always one of the classic questions. And for a few very exceptional individuals, but probably the percentage an incredibly tiny one, simply being an outstanding programmer will get you an incredibly long way. But for most people, that's actually not true. Certainly for me, you know, beyond just that individual being a great programmer, what really matters to the next level is, can that person actually make a really great team? Because an individual on their own is, you know, which means that you start thinking about things like their communication skills and all the rest of it come into play and actually very important. As you progress with the background, really think if you, in any company of any size, to understand and have an appreciation of the interplay between business and technology and how technology decisions impact your occupative business and vice versa. That's a really important space to have a grasp on. And in general, people who can understand that tend to progress faster and further than people who can't or are just not interested.
Okay, I'll skip this one and go on to the last one here, having a non-IT plan B. This was a fun one. I just wanted to ask everyone, what would you do if you didn't program anymore? You said you'd like to be a forest ranger, and there was another group that was quite popular in the book. I didn't put any of the clips in this talk because they're not as popular anymore, called the Java Posse. It was a podcast that basically just was kind of like having an invisible college membership, because you could listen to this podcast and they would talk every week about what was new in the Java ecosystem. So it was you could sort of use them as your distributed filter. But they had some funny stories. So that's the conclusion